Hi. First of all, can you introduce yourself and say where you live?
Sure thing. So my name's Ibrahim. I live in Australia. I live in Australia's second largest city, known as Melbourne. And Melbourne's based it's in the south part of the country. So it's not as warm and dry as other parts of Australia. Often we have an image of Australia as this like really hot place. In Melbourne, it gets a bit cooler, and even today I'm sort of wearing a jumper. It's a bit chilly, and it's kind of summer here as well at the moment.
Awesome. And can you share what happened for people in Melbourne and Australia when the coronavirus started growing around in early 2020?
Yeah, so for us, it was around this time last year when we went through a big national lockdown. So the entire country was shut down for a few months. That meant we had to stay at home. No one was going to the office to work, so we all had to work from home. And we could only leave home for four reasons. One of those reasons was to go shopping to the supermarket if we needed groceries, and we were only allowed to do that once a day. And then to exercise, and then to maybe see a doctor, so for any kind of emergencies. And then if we needed to care for someone as well, so care for maybe our grandparents. So they were the only four reasons that we could leave home, and that was for the entire country to start with for a few months.
It,
Um,
it sounds
and
really
then,
specific and detailed. Like there were really specific, yes, you can do this. No, you can't do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And it worked out really well. It was a really effective approach because, we did have like an initial wave of coronavirus infection spreading throughout the country. And then because of these measures that the government took place, we were able to suppress and bring down the wave of infections by a huge amount, to the point where the country began opening again. Where I live in Melbourne, though, we had a second wave of infections. So the second wave of infections began around sort of June, July last year. This was a few months after the national lockdown. And that second wave of infections started because of a quarantine breach. So we had
What does
a
that mean? A quarantine breach?
That's a good question. So the quarantine breach was a incoming traveller, so an Australian coming back from living overseas. Anyone coming into the country has to quarantine for 2 weeks at a hotel. And what happened was, during their initial stay at the hotel, one of the travellers must have infected a security guard,
Mm.
and then the security guard went and spread that virus just by sort of mingling with their family and mingling with other people in the community, ended up
Mm.
spreading that virus across the city. So we had a second wave here in Melbourne. And because of the second wave, we had a second lockdown as well, which meant that we had to spend a few months at home, like only being able to leave home for four reasons. And that lasted for a few months as well. So it was a very strict lockdown that we had here in Melbourne, which was also very effective. Now we're sort of able to like walk about, we're able to like move around freely throughout the city, because of those measures that were quite successful.
So let me ask a little bit more about what life is like for people in Melbourne and Australia now. Like, do people wear
Mhm.
masks on the streets? Are schools back open? Is shopping and everything happening normally?
Now it is yes. For a long time that wasn't the case. So even up until a few weeks ago, we had to wear face masks. Leaving the house, we had to wear face masks. Being in any kind of enclosed space, so somewhere indoors like the supermarket, for example, you had to wear a face mask. And they've only been lifted over the past few weeks because we have zero cases at the moment here in Melbourne and across the country. We're now allowed to walk around freely without face masks. And we're, pretty much like we've pretty much gone back to a normal way of living life. And I think like that is because of the very successful lockdown that we had. So because we had a very severe lockdown at one stage where you could only leave home for four reasons, and you had to wear a face mask when you left your house, that resulted now in what is like a pretty sort of like a resumption of normalcy, which is being able to go about your normal life as you would prior to the pandemic.
Cool. I think you've already answered this, but is there anything more you want to say about what people in Australia have done well, individual people, to help stop the spread
Sure,
of COVID?
sure. I think sort of the best thing, sort of looking back in hindsight now, I think sort of one of the most encouraging things about the way the community worked together to deal with the impact of COVID was that I think most people were happy to stay at home. I think most people were able to listen to scientific advice, and the scientific and health advice at the time was that in order to protect each other, in order to protect the community, especially our most vulnerable people, we kind of have to, only for a few months, we kind of have to forego some of our freedoms. Our freedoms like being able to go to the supermarket, our freedoms like being able to catch up with our friends. I think because most people were able to listen to the scientific and health advice and be, happily forego our freedoms for a period of time, we were able to protect our community at large. And I think that is probably one of the best lessons about Australia's approach was that, we work together as a community. We kind of had to sacrifice a few things for a period of time, but most people were able to, take home the message that, our doctors gave us, take home the message our government leaders gave us, which was, you kind of have to make some sacrifices, for the outcome of the community. And it's something that I think, compared to other parts of the world, there are some countries in the world where that didn't happen. Some countries in the world where things like, business and the economy were considered to be more important than how we look after our most vulnerable people. And I think, as we've shown here in Australia, by having strict lockdowns, which is what we had, you can often protect the community in the long term, and the economy in the long term is in a better position anyway. So now we can, go to the shops, we can catch up with our friends, we can do things that we used to do prior to the pandemic. And for the most part, we're in a better position. But if we had decided that we don't want to lock down, we still want to go about our freedoms without looking after each other, then the long-term consequences, both from a health perspective and also from an economic perspective as well, would be more severe for the country.
And so the other side of that, right? There's people's job. The other side is the government. So are there other things you think the government did especially well to help Australia be pretty successful with COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sort of once again, sort of building on what I was saying earlier, I think, one of the really encouraging aspects of the way the government dealt with this, especially I think state governments, sometimes the federal government was a bit slow to act, but I think with state governments, they were very quick to act. So they listened to the doctors and they listened to the scientists. And I think that was, for me, and I think for most people in the Australian community, one of the most sort of encouraging aspects of it. So just the fact that our government leaders were able to listen to the scientists and the doctors and then make the decisions based on what the community needs, in hindsight, was probably, the most encouraging aspect of it.
Awesome. And is there any other important thought that you have that you want to share with the second graders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just looking after each other, looking after, knowing as well that the pandemic, it's not just about me, it's also about people that I love. It's about my family, it's about my friends, and just keeping in mind that things like the lockdown, they were severe and they're very hard, and it's a lot of work, and no one wants to stay at home all the time and not be able to catch up with their friends or do fun activities outside. But yeah, just the takeaway is that for the people that we love, we stayed at home and we had to kind of just bear it for a while.
All right. Thank you so much, Ibrahim.